And we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today we have fantasy author Christen Stovall with us, and she's here to talk about her Song of Souls trilogy. And I'm going to turn it over to her now and let her introduce herself. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Christen Stovall. I write high fantasy. I've got a trilogy out and completed called the Song of Souls trilogy, which follows a few characters, mostly a young woman named Aislinn, and I'm currently working on a sort of prequel to that. So I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So tell us a little bit about the series, what it's about, an overview of what happens, stuff like that.
Um, in many ways, the trilogy is about sort of moving forward after you face something difficult, but I've framed it within a very classic high fantasy story. It follows the adventures of a young woman named Aislinn and her soulmate, Roran, although typically called Rory in the trilogy. It starts out with Rory's death, and they are bound together. Their souls are bound together, which gives Aislinn certain abilities to heal other characters, and it follows her sort of adventure. I don't spend a lot of time on the training, just a little bit, because I want to get to the heart of the story, but she ultimately finds herself thrust into this huge adventure that is way over her head, and she kind of just has to navigate her way through it. It's always hard to say, what it's about without giving too much away, because I'm terrible. I will give everything away if I don't rein myself in. I want to tell everybody everything that's happening.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what inspired the story. It's a little sad, but still it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, in 2010, May 1st, I had been married a year and a half, and my husband Dustin ended his life after a battle with depression and chronic pain. And I mean, when that happens and you're 28 years old, you don't know what, like, my whole life was over. It was obliterated. Everything I had planned was gone. Like, I had a life planned, I had a family I wanted to have, and that was all gone. And it really felt not just like he died, but like my whole family died. I didn't, there were kids we were never going to have and holidays we would never celebrate. And I touch on that in the books. And I really struggled to find purpose for a while. And it took a few years to get to where I turned back to my creativity. But I was listening to music one night on YouTube, as I tend to do. So a lot of my scene ideas come from a song I hear. But I heard this piece of music, and it made me sort of envision a young woman and a young man, and she was alive and he was dead, and it was them getting to say goodbye. Which I did not put that scene in the book, so it's not a spoiler, but the concept started to come into play. How you do feel separated and different from other people when at a young age you go through something like that, because it's just so far out of the realm of what most of your social circle has dealt with, or that they understand, and it's very isolating. But then, you really do wish you just had that one last time to say goodbye, that you could just talk to them or see them. And from there, the two characters, Aislinn and Rory, took form, and then another character who's sort of their bestie, Lysander, who's a young wizard, and based off my dear, dear, dear friend Eric. They all started to take form, and then a few more. Kieran, a young man about to have to take on some really huge responsibility.
Okay, you froze.
Oh no! Am
We
I
have
unfrozen?
lost a guest.
Oh no, I
Oh,
can
no,
still hear you.
no, no, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
You
I
were
don't know what
talking about
happened.
Kieran. You froze temporarily, and then you came back. So
Oh, there you go.
continue
Apparently
on.
he's been mad at me since I finished the trilogy, so I think that was just him being a brat. Anyway, he has a lot of responsibilities to face, and as each of the characters kind of took shape in my mind, their relationships to one another took shape, and the overall arc of the story started happening. And when I finished it, I went, this is not one book, this is a trilogy. So I started working on the first book, and getting it out there, and it really became a very therapeutic thing, because it was difficult for me to share how I felt and what it was like to go through that. I'm contrary to how I seem right now. I'm actually really shy and really, really private, but it gave me that outlet to share this is how I felt. But it also gave me that distance and that safety of going, but these are not me. These characters are not me, and that's not Dustin, but this is how it felt, you know?
Okay,
Also, I
so
didn't get any cool magic powers when he died. I just,
that
more's the pity.
so apparently you didn't freeze for our viewers, which is good because
Oh, good.
yeah,
Good.
Joe has informed us. So
Oh, yay.
yeah, just on my end apparently. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the characters. What are their personalities? What are they like?
Well, Aislinn is she's very she did never had any ideas of wanting adventure or anything like that. She wanted to have the family in the home, and she grew up in this very isolated little country village far from the royal city or anything like that. Just her father, her family were farmers. Rory was from one of the more wealthy families in that area, and they grew up together but didn't really associate until they were older, and then he noticed her, and from that moment on, that was sort of meant to be. But then when they're parted, when he dies in a horrible accident, they then go to the magic city and have to deal with all of that stuff. That's where they meet Lysander, he's a big fan favorite because Zan is he's a happy guy. He's always there for his friends. His familiar is a beagle because my real friend has a beagle. So it's like, we're gonna do that. And he is the quintessential sidekick. He's always there. He's got your back. He's always very optimistic, and I would say they're all naive. Kieran is the young future ruler. He's in my world. I've set it up so that you don't actually reach the age of leadership until about 24. So I wanted to go with a little bit more contemporary ages rather than it would have been in a medieval setting, which we're talking very young for stuff. And he's a young man who's got a lot of pressure on him, and he was not always surrounded by the best people who wanted to prepare him truly for that. There were some alternative motivations sometimes. So they all come together in their own ways, and that's how they start out. Then they develop and change a lot through the series, as we as human beings do when we're faced with difficult situations that we don't expect. I think that's something we can all relate to right now. So they all start out very young and very naive. And so the first book really comes off as much simpler than it is, with the characters being much more naive, and it was a very intentional decision to have them start that way and to have the story start that way, because I love book series where the characters start one way and you see the effect of what they go through, and by the end of it, you see the toll it's taken on them. I always think that that's an interesting part of reading a a book, any story, whether it's fantasy or anything really.
Hmm. Well, it sounds like you've gone with the traditional medieval settings. Did you mix anything in, or is it just straightforward, typical fantasy
Um,
as far as settings go?
I would say, as far as settings go, it's definitely your typical sort of epic fantasy. Those are what I like the most because it makes me feel very taken away. It's very immersive for me, and I love Ren fairs and things like that. I go to those all the time. I do someday want to dabble in maybe something a little different, but that's what I wanted to do for this world and this series. I do mix things up a little bit. Um, you catch that more in the second book. You see where the differences are. The second book is where you see there's more going on. So have to be sneaky and just set up and be like, yes, it's lovely. Just but wait, there's more.
Yeah, yeah. A sneaky author's putting in these little things.
We do. I always love when an author will put stuff in that's foreshadowing or hints, but you don't realize until you get like further on, and then you go, oh, what? Or you go
Yeah,
back and reread it, and you're like, that was part of that, but I didn't no. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah,
I like when I get surprised like that.
yeah, and sometimes it happens by accident, which is really nice.
Yes, yes, they do tend to take on a life of their own. I've
Yeah,
noticed as I write, I'll find that I'll get an idea and go, "Oh, this is much better than how I was originally gonna get there." You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I threw in kind of a running joke in the series I'm working on now that's actually turned into a plot point in book 4. So
Oh, that's fun. I like to do uh little things like that, or I'll do nods to pop culture stuff, but not in any way that sort of takes from it. There's a nod to sort of Doctor Who in this. It's just in there at one point they come up on something and one of the characters goes, "Huh, I thought that would be bigger." And Zan goes, "Well, it's most likely bigger on the inside." So a
yeah,
little
I
shout
did
out to
that
Doctor
too.
Who.
I did that too.
And then in the prequel I'm working on, I actually have one of the characters in one of their statements or lines. I'm a theater kid, so my brain thinks lines. Um, they actually say one of the chapter titles that's in the trilogy. It's part of what they say to somebody else because I was like, I love that. You know, just tie them together. So,
Okay, so what was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the series?
uh, there were a couple for different reasons. The very beginning was very hard. The very beginning of Soulbound, the first book, was very hard for me because it was the one that most closely mirrored when my husband died, except for the circumstances. My husband ended his life. Rory is killed in an accident. But there's a point at which I talk about a scream when he died, just this scream that Aislinn lets loose with, and I that happened in real life when they did find him and confirm that it was my husband. That happened. I did scream like that. So that was, and that first chapter deals with Aislinn just having the emptiness and loneliness and overwhelming sadness of this person being gone. All of the little things like looking over and there's no one on their side of the bed. That was really hard on an emotional level because that was the part that made me feel the most exposed and I had to relive those feelings. And then on a more technical level, anything that involves a lot of action and a lot of movement where you have to organize and make sure this makes sense and that makes sense and you know what's happening and everything's locking together the way that it is. And then, I mean, that applies to the whole trilogy too, because you have to do that with each book. Make sure the stuff you put here locks in with what you put here. You remembered how to spell that character's name that you've used 5 times, that town's name that you don't use that often, but it's an important place, but you keep forgetting what you named it, you know,
Yeah,
because I do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why I have lists.
Yep.
Do that too.
Uh,
Yeah, and it's. How did you spell that? Did I spell it this way? Did I spell it that way? It's
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. How did I do that? And then even just ending it was hard because it I started, I mean, it took about, I think, 5 years to do the whole thing to get it beginning to end, starting writing the first one to releasing the third book and releasing that third book going, I'm done with these characters. I'm done with this story. I'm done with this part of my life. And that was hard. They become real to you. Your characters become real to you on so not in a like crazy person way, but they're a part of you. And saying goodbye to them was hard, and knowing that it was done and they were done. You know, that was really hard. But there's always work to do with your books. It's just that was a stage of done, you know.
okay, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene to have written in the trilogy?
The mean ones. I'm not gonna lie. Whenever I'm being terrible to my characters, I'm like, yeah.
Oh, I finally found the same person who does the same thing I do with mean scenes.
It's my favorite part.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
mean part.
Yeah, most authors I interview, oh, it's so hard to do mean things to my
Nope,
characters. And I'm going, I can't relate to that.
nope. I
I
mean,
can relate to you.
I like setting the world and all of that, but the most fun part is when I'm tormenting them. I'm like, no, no, it's good for you. You're gonna grow from this. I'm telling you. I don't like books that are all feel good. Like the ending, the ending has to be earned, whether it's good or bad or deep or meaningful. Like if they haven't been through something, I feel like the ending isn't earned. Like I like to be mean. So, the mean parts.
Okay, so what are your characters afraid of?
um, well, Aislinn, obviously, there's a fear of losing people, like of losing the people she cares about. That's something that's deeply impacted her. On a more superficial level, she does not like being underground. She really hates that. And I did take that from myself. I don't like being underground. I'm claustrophobic. It's terrifying. Um, Rory, he's in a different position because he's not physically alive, so he doesn't have like he can't really be afraid of something hurting because he's a spirit. Like it's not going to physically hurt. I think his deepest fear is watching those around him suffer and not being able to really do anything to stop it. Uh, Kieran's biggest fear is failure, messing it up, not getting it right, people suffering because of decisions he made, making the wrong decision. And Zan, I'm not going to get into that yet because I think it's something I'll explore later. So, I don't think I want to get into that one just yet. I'm still working out all the details of that. So.
Ooh, intriguing. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you might get into other genres other than fantasy at future point. So what ones were you thinking of?
It there will probably always be some fantasy element just because that's my jam. That's the genre I read the most, so I feel like I have the best sort of touch base with what that audience looks for in a story. But I've thought about, despite being a complete chicken, I've thought about doing stuff that was a little more on the scary side, a little more on the horror side. Possibly doing stuff that still has a fantasy lean but takes place in a Victorian setting. But it's not completely your classic epic fantasy thing. I will be sticking with this world and these characters for a while because there's so much I want to develop still. Other countries, there's a lot in my brain that goes together like a mosaic, and I want to bring it all down, and at the end of the day it's the world I created and I really like playing in it.
Okay, great. So I think we'll wrap it up here and I'll let you tell everybody where they can find you and your books.
All right. Well, I can be found on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Honestly, Facebook's the best place to track me down. If you look up Song of Souls Trilogy, you should be able to find the page for the books, and you can keep updated on all of what I'm writing. The next book coming out is something of a prequel called The Twisted Path, and we don't have a release date set for that yet, but it is in editing. I'm not as often on Twitter or Instagram because I don't like them, but I have them anyway. You can also find my books on Amazon, both print and Kindle version, and you can find hardback versions on Barnes and Noble.
Okay, and I have a link to her first book on Amazon in the description. So if you want to check it out, go there. And I'd like to thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And Between the Pages, we'll be back next weekend with 2 more guests. So join us then. Bye for now.